I think when many boys are young, they will imagine themselves as a general, fantasize about all kinds of bold and crazy tactics, and command their own army to defeat enemies, several times their number. However, after fully understanding relevant knowledge, it will be found that the exertion of the subjective initiative of generals has prerequisites. For example, whether the logistical support of the army is reliable, whether the number of soldiers and weapons and equipment are sufficient, and whether the quality of soldiers is guaranteed. When the enemy is not stupid, any tactic can only add to the icing on the cake and cannot turn the tide. Behind the war is actually the economy, but in the impression we have received since childhood, there seems to be an army that is not like this. That is the Red Army led by the Communist Party of China during the revolutionary period. They seem to really rely on unwavering beliefs and use millet-plus rifles to defeat the well-equipped reactionaries under extremely difficult conditions. This can't help but make me wonder, even the predatory wars of nomadic people still require the permission of natural conditions. At that time, it was already modern times. The decisive factor for the outcome of the war is still the economy. In simple terms, fighting a war requires money and a material foundation. After all, spirit is difficult to overcome matter. But did our Red Army look like they had money at that time? But the fact is that the Red Army finally won. Is this contrary to common sense? Our army didn't take a single needle or thread from the masses at that time. So where did the money for fighting come from? It is also this question that finally makes me have a strong interest in our party's history. Through my studies in recent days, I have found that the so-called guerrilla warfare is far from being as simple as violent struggle. The economic confrontation is even more thrilling and is also a decisive factor for victory. In the next few episodes, let's discuss this issue in detail. The issue of money is actually whether material conditions are sufficient, and material conditions need productivity to be guaranteed. First, let's mention a subversive perception. After going through a difficult birth process, the Red Army was actually not poor. Or rather, compared to their enemies, they were not destitute in terms of materials. Of course, the economic system of the Communist Party in the years of struggle was not achieved overnight, especially in the early days of the founding of the party. The Communist Party did not control any productive forces. So where did the initial funds come from? It is undeniable that the earliest funds of the Communist Party did indeed mainly come from the Soviet Union and benefited from the help of the Communist International. Until the Russian October Revolution was victorious and Soviet Russia was born. But immediately after that, Soviet Russia was fiercely counterattacked by the more-nation coalition, including Japan, France, Britain, the United States, and the BRN government, as well as domestic rebels. The offensive was extremely powerful, and the Soviet Union could hardly resist. In 2 years, it lost a large amount of territory, and a large number of Soviet Red Army soldiers and communists were massacred. The Soviet Union realized that it would definitely not be able to hold on like this. What should it do? After research, it was found that the reason why these countries attacked the Soviet Union was because they were afraid that the Soviet Union would become an example for revolutionaries in their own country. So for the Soviet Union, the only way now is to let the communists inside these countries start an uprising immediately. Let what you are afraid of coming this way. The power of these countries can be weakened from the rear. Thus, in the third year of the war, the Communist International was born. Immediately after that, there were massive workers' movements in Britain, France, and Japan. This matter was also mentioned when talking about the Japanese Communist Party. Nearly 1 million people across the country participated in the uprising, forcing the government and the army to return home. Soon, the uprisings in European countries also made the West unable to continue to support the war against the Soviet Union, and these countries had to withdraw one after another. This Communist International has to provide financial and weapons support for communism in various countries. Subsequently, the Soviet Union concentrated its forces to eliminate the domestic white bandit rebels, and the regime was stabilized. At this time, the Soviet Union also realized that it is not possible for only one country to achieve socialism. Sooner or later, it will still be jointly encircled and suppressed by imperialism. Therefore, the whole world must be involved in the struggle against the old forces. Thus, the Soviet Union injected funds into revolutions around the world through various channels. The funds come from the confiscation of the property of the domestic old forces and capitalists, as well as the treasures of the Christian Church by the Soviet Red Army. The objects of funding, of course, also include Chinese revolutionaries. Through various means, the Soviet Union tried to give a large amount of funds and weapons support to the Revolutionary Army, led by Sun Yat-sen, and at the same time was also helping the establishment of the Communist Party of China. Moreover, because Chen Duxiu was the leader of the My Entity movement before and was also a wanted person during the Bayan government period. Just 1 month after the convening of the First National Congress of the Communist Party of China, Chen Duxiu and his family were arrested by French policemen. The Communist International advisor Ma Ying did his best and spent a lot of money to get through all the links of the mixed court before he rescued Chen Duxiu. Given that Chen Duxiu was still one of the core leaders of the Communist Party at that time, and also the contact note for information on the National Communist Movement without him, the various departments of the newly established Communist Party would be paralyzed due to lack of communication. So this time Ma Ying, Chen Duxiu and the Communist Party of China can be said to have gone through hardships together. After experiencing this incident, Chen Duxiu also realized that many activities really cannot be carried out without money. So he began to express that the Communist Party of China supports the Communist International. In the following years, when the Communist Party of China was still in Shanghai, the Communist International began to steadily inject funds into the Communist Party of China. Although Chinese Communist Party members were also trying every means to open up more sources of income, these incomes were negligible compared with the assistance from the Communist International. So these representatives of the Communist International could naturally give orders to a certain extent. At that time, all activities of the party, big or small, had to be reported to the Communist International, and all actions could only be carried out under the instructions of the Communist International. This led to the successful experience of the Soviet Revolution being completely copied by early Chinese communists, that is, organizing workers to launch uprisings in big cities, seizing all industrial factories and means of production, obtaining the most powerful and advanced productive forces, and then controlling the supply of industrial products and spreading the revolution to all classes and regions across the country to achieve revolutionary victory. The previous Mad Death movement seemed to also confirm this assertion. Workers' strikes, emergency shutdowns directly led to the compromise of the Bayan government. So at that time, the leaders of the party believed that the center of revolutionary activities could only be in cities and revolve around workers. Now, as descendants, we of course understand that at that time, China's industrialization was extremely backward. There was not much industrial production capacity in cities, and the power of workers was not as huge as imagined. But at that time, there were no Monday morning quarterbacks like us, and few people could see this point. When problems arose, they only felt that maybe the work intensity was not enough. So in the 3 years after the founding of the party, the mobilized workers and students fell in droves in the pool of blood of struggle. The victory of the Maoist movement never reappeared. At that time, a large amount of funds of the Communist Party of China were used to support the families of the martyrs. At this time, the Kuomintang led by Sun Yat-sen was also frustrated everywhere. Although it had tens of thousands of armed forces, its mass work was relatively poor and it had no money. The fruits of the victory of the Wilson Revolution were snatched by Yuan Shikai. Several Hufa movements all failed and the area controlled became smaller and smaller. The Communist Party's revolution lacked personnel and armed forces. So entirely with the support of the Soviet Union, the cooperation between the Kuomintang and the Communist Party began to fight warlords and the Bayan government. In the first cooperation between the Kuomintang and the Communist Party, communists joined the Kuomintang as individuals. The army of the Kuomintang received a large amount of assistance from the Soviet Union. The famous Wampata Military Academy was established at this time. Since the Communist Party has an innate advantage in mobilizing the power of grassroots workers, there is also a certain division of labor between the Kuomintangs and the Communist Party. Military strategies, international relations, and national planning are mainly completed by the Kuomintang, while all grassroots work for the masses and political work in the army are mainly done by communists. Specifically, it is to carry out rallies, strikes, and other movements in cities controlled by the Bayan warlord. doing a good job in mass work is also the reason why the National Revolutionary Army and the Northern Expedition was able to be unstoppable. This division of labor seemed very reasonable at that time, but after the breakdown of cooperation between the Kuomintang and the Communist Party, that accelerated the future failure of the Kuomintang. Next, let's talk about this process in detail. As the demise of warlord forces and the Backying government has become a foregone conclusion, internal contradictions within the Kuomintang are increasingly emerging. The Chiang Kai-shek clique, which rose to power relying on big corporate families, big capitalists and landlord forces, and the Wang Jingwei clique, which represents workers, peasants, students, and small merchants, each established their own regimes and launched political struggle. At the beginning, all communists within the Kuomintang naturally leaned towards Wang Jingwei and were considered the backbone representing the interests of the lower classes within the Kuomintang. Subsequently, the Communist Party called the Chiang Kai-shek clique the right wing of the Kuomintang, and the Wang Jingwei forces the left wing. Gradually, in the work within the Kuomintang, communists gradually became the targets of heavy suppression by the right wing. Communist Party members who previously held important positions were excluded one after another, and middle-level cadres also fell into endless political struggles. And the ideological assimilation ability of the Communist Party is too strong. More and more left-wing members within the Kuomintang gradually joined the Communist Party. Wang Jingwei was also apprehensive about this, so he expressed sympathy for the situation of communists, but did not support communists and allowed Chiang Kai-shek to suppress communists. The Communist International actually turned a blind eye to such things because the Soviet Union still thought that Chiang Kai-shek's power was stronger and was still funding him to fight against the warlords hostile to the Soviet Union. Basically, it looked down on Chinese communists without armed forces, so the Soviet Union asked the communists to compromise and endure. Since at this time, the funds of the Communist Party of China still came from the Communist International, Chen Duxiu, as the leader of the Communist Party at that time, could only obey. He even asked the only armed force led by the Communist Party at that time, the workers' pickets in the city, to give up their arms and hand in their gun. In fact, Chen Duxiu also resisted at that time, but all of them were ineffective because the Communist International required the Communist Party of China to completely assist the Kuomintang, not allowed to seize leadership and not allowed to withdraw from the party. So they had to be passively beaten everywhere. At this time, the consequences of losing autonomy due to funding problems were fully manifest. This is the direct reason why the Kuomintang was able to massacre communists and left-wing progressives a few years later. The workers' movement failed one after another, and the national revolution gradually lost its direction at this time. The finances of the Communist Party of China were controlled, and its decrees were restrained. The Kuomintang once again became a tool for conservative forces to control the country. The corporate landlords and big capitalists represented by Chiang Kai-shek came to power again. After such a long struggle, there's still no hope for the liberation of the people across the country. After experiencing the magnificent national revolution, everything seems to have returned to the original point. China is still controlled by landlord corporate bureaucratic capitalism. At this time, Mao Zedong, who was a candidate member of the Kuomintang and also a Communist Party member, really couldn't stand the office disputes of this kind of party struggle. After all, he was only a candidate member at that time, although he was unwilling to be excluded. After several efforts failed and he lost in the struggle, he was exhausted and depressed. He didn't want to work anymore, but he didn't want to be idle either. So in December, he took sick leave, saying that he had neurasthenia, and went back to his hometown in Henan to recuperate. This seemingly accidental move unexpectedly led to the rekindling of new hope. Originally, Mao Zedong, who was angry, returned to his hometown in Henan. To his surprise and delight, he found that the previous Great Revolution was not without any result. The peasant movement triggered by the National Revolutionary Army was still going on, and its scale was rapidly expanding. Peasants from all over Henan are spontaneously organizing themselves and forming groups. Exploiters who used to oppress the people in the countryside, such as landlords and local officials, are arrested. Their wealth is confiscated, and they are even publicly criticized by the whole village. This is something unseen in 1,000 years in Chinese history. Interesting. After learning about the general situation, Mao Zedong was very delighted, and his neurasthenia was cured immediately. He immediately called people from the central government to conduct research on this peasant movement. Before, when he was in Shanghai, he only heard that there were rural bully riots here. What happened in the countryside here hardly attracted the attention of any communists in the city. Like most public opinions, communists also think this is a disturbance caused by rural ruffians. At first, the communists were influenced by the thought of the absolute superiority of the working class, transmitted from the Soviet Union. They thought that the movement launched by peasants would only end up being something like the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom movement that changed dynasty. They didn't think highly of peasants at all, but in the rural areas of Hunan at present, what Mao Zedong saw was that under the guidance of democratic revolutionary thought, peasants did not want to become new officials and then become new emperor. Instead, they formed peasant associations by themselves. The peasant associations are in charge of the whole village. Any poor and lower middle peasants can join this peasant association, have a say. What is revolution? This is revolution. It is not that the ruling classes changed from the Kuang emperor to Yuan Shikai warlords and then to Jiang Kai-ci Kiao Yang Jingwei. The revolution here has been only a little over a year, but the members of peasant associations in Hunan have exceeded 1 million, and the coverage is growing exponentially. Mao Zedong originally planned to take sick leave this time and come back to see the situation of workers in cities in Hunan, by the way. However, he found that in China, the most powerful producers are still peasants. So after more than 3 months of investigation, Mao Zedong completed an analysis of the classes in Chinese society. At the very beginning, it is proposed that the effectiveness of all revolutionary struggles in China in the past was very little. The basic reason is that we cannot unite true friends to attack true enemies. We must see clearly the class nature of China and unite and represent the broadest and most powerful class group in China. And this group is not only workers, but also the vast majority of peasants, and the ones to deal with are warlords, bureaucrats, comparators, and big landlords. And at the beginning of EP, Mao Zedong returned to Shanghai with such an analysis report and confronted Chen Tuxu and Zhang Kutao, accusing them of forgetting peasants. But it can be imagined what the situation would be like when Mao Zedong, as a candidate member with little influence, ran to criticize the core leaders of the Communist Party at that time. The thought of uniting peasants was considered whimsical and no one paid any attention at all. But at that time, Mao Zedong was also in his prime of youth and had little influence. Since I have little influence, then I will become an official. So, under the general background of cooperation between the Kuomintang and the Communist Party, he began to work hard. He initiated several basic projects of the National Revolution in the Shaoshan area to prove his ability. Soon in September, remember, Mao Zedong was promoted by Wang Jingwei to be the acting minister of the propaganda department of the Central Committee of the Kunan. In March of the following year, he used his power to host the Peasant Movement Training Institute. He himself served as the director and began to train a large number of backbones of the peasant movement, cultivated professional forces for organizing the peasant movement, and sent them to the countryside in large numbers. Subsequently, he resigned as the minister of the propaganda department of the Central Committee of the Kuomintang and became the secretary of the Peasant Movement Committee of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China. In early rows, he led the peasant movement backbone team he had assembled to come to Hunan again to specifically conduct a larger-scale investigation. In county days, he walked 9 kilometers. The investigation found that at this time, the members of the Hunan peasant associations and the forces they led had exceeded 4 million. You should know that the entire Northern Expeditionary Army had no more than 18 soldiers. This force is extremely powerful, and he created that famous report on an investigation of the Hunan peasant movement years with more than capital tower work. This report can be easily read online. Now, the report first gives a proper name to the peasant movement. What is happening here is not the so-called terrible ruffian movement as everyone says, but has strict organization and clear purpose. It is the vanguard of the revolution and the force that we must unite and represent. Then it detailed the more major deeds done by the peasant movement. In summary, it is to organize all oppressed peasants into peasant associations to form a powerful force, overthrow the previous rule of landlords and local officials, hand over all administrative, military, armed power in the countryside to peasant associations, conduct trials, convictions, and punishments. on landlords and bureaucrats. The wealth obtained from punishments and compensations is distributed by peasant associations. Legislate to limit the rights of the remaining landlords and ensure the interests of peasants. After breaking the control of feudal ancestral holds and clan chiefs over families and breaking feudal patriarchal systems, advocate equality between men and women. After solving status issues, also regulate peasant behavior and prohibit bad habits such as gambling. Then organize forces to eliminate benefits and abolish various miscellaneous and onerous taxes before under reasonable. But then it was impossible to ignore any longer. White terror swept across the land of China. In Rian the same year this report was issued, Chiang Kai-shek, taking advantage of the concessions of the Communist International and Shen Duxiu, launched a counter-revolutionary coup on April State. He used his own armed forces and enlisted the help of criminal syndicates such as the Green Gang in Shanghai to brutally massacre Communist Party members and left-wing members of the Kuomintang. Later, in order to protect himself, Wang Jingwei also participated. In less than 2 years, they found people were arrested and executed. Among them, unfound were Communist Party members including Chen Duxiu's 2 sons and Li Koji, were left-wing members of the Kuomintang. The Communist Party's organization in Shanghai went underground. Chen Duxiu's propositions completely collapsed and he was immediately removed from his post. From then on, the Communist Party embarked on the path of seizing power by violence. In Tifid, in the same year when the purge of the Communist Party began, the Communist Party assembled the troops led by the left-wing members of the Kuomintang to attack Nansha. Mao Zedong was also sent to Hunan to assemble forces to attack Changsha. As a result, all efforts failed. The troops were greatly reduced and they had to give up attacking the city. The two forces then met at Jingai Mountain, held fast to natural barriers, and established rural revolutionary bases. In Pop, under the shadow of White Terror, the headquarters of the Communist Party could no longer stay in Shanghai and had to move to the countryside of Wulijin. As a result, the connection with the Communist International was cut off, and the funds from the Communist International could not be supplied. At this time, most party members felt that the future was bleak. Compromise and concession led to being strangled by reactionary forces. Many surviving party members also withdrew from the party out of fear. The number of party members dropped from more than shopping Fontor to Tufa. The violent resistance through strenuous struggles also failed. The army was greatly reduced in numbers, but did not capture a single city. They had to come to such a remote and poor place to temporarily avoid the limelight. At this time, the most important source of funds was lost. If this situation continued, collapse was only a matter of time. However, while a large number of party members were defecting, there were also people like Gudio Marudo and Pi Long who joined the party on the front line. Because people who could see the current situation clearly saw a new future for the Communist Party of China at this time. First of all, in fact, the Kuomintang suffered the greatest loss in Chiang Kai-shek's purge of the Communist Party. The Kuomintang lost Soviet funding. Moreover, all the grassroots work of the entire revolutionary army was done by the Communist Party and the left-wing members of the Kuomintang united by it. In this purge movement, the Kuomintang can be said to have completely destroyed its own grassroots organizations. The party organizations below the county level of the Kuomintang were all lost, and most of these grassroots levels were controlled by local tyrants, evil gentry, and underworld organizations. And as for their ruling ability in the countryside, the peasant associations in Hunan had already defeated them. Organizing grassroots masses is exactly what the Communist Party is good at. Mao Zedong's investigation report has already pointed out that the peasant class is the most powerful productive force in China. How to lead this force has been indicated by the more major events. This creates a vacuum of power at the grassroots level of the Kuomintang and is a good opportunity for the Communist Party to develop.